everyone. My name is Heather Gilberts, and on behalf of the Center for International Media Assistance, I'd like to welcome you to our event, our Punchlines, the New Frontlines of Media Development. We have an amazing lineup of guests here today to talk about the role that satire can play in media development efforts. The Center for International Media Assistance is a research and knowledge platform within the National Endowment for Democracy. We are dedicated to improving efforts to support independent media systems around the world. And we advance this mission by producing high-quality research, convening working groups in the media development community, and hosting events. The topic of today's event, Satire News, is a relatively unexplored part of media development, but its ability to attract audiences and provide critical news commentary in an entertaining way makes it an important tool for promoting democratic rights and freedoms. Satire explores the absurdities of power. It can help engage those who otherwise find politics tedious. Even in restrictive political environments, satire can criticize the powerful through its comedic cloak. However, satire is not without rebuke. What risks do satirists face in their work? How do they navigate criticisms that they are spreading fake news or promoting stereotypes? These issues and others will be explored over the next hour. The webinar will follow a roundtable format discussing the craft of satire and its strengths and weaknesses in different political environments. After the roundtable is complete, we will have 15 to 20 minutes for comments and questions from the audience. Instead of using the hand raise function to ask a question, we ask that you please use the Q&A chat function and type a comment or question to the webinar's hosts at any time during the event. All questions will be held until the roundtable is complete. So without further delay, I'm delighted to introduce our event's panelists. Nkechi Nwabudike is a film and television writer and producer. Most recently, she was head producer for The Other News, Nigeria's first primetime news and political satire show. Dylan Case is the CEO and co-founder of Pilot Media Initiatives, which helps produce entertaining TV shows and media campaigns to advance international media development objectives. Jovana Avramovska is an anchor and part of the writing and production team of Yesterday's News, a satirical news program in Macedonia. She loves a good laugh, especially when it provokes thinking. Tanya Dramatsdurius is a program officer at the National Endowment for Democracy, where she oversees the Democracy Assistance Program in Southeast Europe. And last but not least, Victor Markovich is the founder and writer for the satirical website Newsnet in Serbia, which he started with a bunch of other guys 10 years ago. However, he would like us to know that he only started earning money from it 8 years ago, and that he hopes to do this for his entire life, or at least until the next pandemic. Welcome to all panelists. We are so glad you could join us today. Before we begin the roundtable, we have a short video to help illustrate what satire news looks like. I'd like to ask Nkechi to introduce a video of The Other News in Nigeria. Nkechi, could you explain briefly a bit about The Other News and what we will be seeing?
Sure. The Other News is a news and political satire show. It's modeled against The Daily Show in the US. We don't like to be compared to The Daily Show, by the way, but it's modeled after that. It's a show that tries to combine news and comedy in a way that people find approachable and appreciable. We also try to use it to sort of sneak in sort of stronger political views and mindsets. That's generally the summary of what The Other News is.
Great, thank you. Well, we're excited to see the video.
Yeah, my name is OK. This is the show that you've been waiting for.
This is my card. Okay. I am saying to the existing political class, game over. Get off the pitch.
Wow! America want to fight North Korea because their leaders want to find out who has the biggest button in the land. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the only thing that can cause fights with other countries is jollof rice.
I'm asking young people, organize yourself. They have all the tools that they need. They have the social media. And it's not just about getting there and posting nude pictures and talking trash.
Yeah.
And assaulting us with their terrible grammar. Okay? It's about, mobilizing and organizing themselves.
Election day was an opportunity for the youth to come out en masse and vote for councillors and chairmen that will represent them. So thousands of youths woke up that early morning in spite of the rain and did what young people do best: tweet from their beds.
Thank you very much, Nkechi. This gives a great introduction to our first discussion theme, which is about the craft of satire. So for our panelists who practice the art of satire, why did you become involved in it? So I'm really looking at Victor, Giovanna, and Nkechi. Why did you become involved in satire? Victor, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Well, it happened basically pretty by chance. I was always a fan of comedies and humor, and I was also writing funny stuff on the internet for myself on social media and stuff like that, and for friends. And then it just happened one day that I saw this guy that started a website that looked a lot like The Onion, the American satire website, but only in Serbian language. So I sent a couple of articles, and they loved it. And it turned out that it wasn't a day; it was just one guy. And after a while, a team of us started writing, and it just sort of happened. It wasn't planned, and let alone it was planned for me to make a living out of this. But ever since, let's say, eight years, this is my primary job. So I wasn't planning, and definitely wasn't planning to do some, let's say, activism satire, but it just sort of happened that all the pressure of activism is now on us comedians here in Serbia. So it's not only the team who runs the website, but other comedy outlets in Serbia who now also have this extra, let's say, obligation to fight for free speech and fight for human rights, which was never the intention, I guess, by neither of the people doing comedy here. So I guess this is the story with every satirist. Nobody goes to school for satire. It just sort of happens.
Thanks, Victor. Sometimes the political environment demands you become an activist against your best intentions.
Yeah, exactly.
What about you, Giovanna? Could you explain a little bit about why you started to get into the satire field?
Yes, I actually started because it's fun. Of course, like Victor here said, but that's only like a small part of why. I think that at the time when we were starting, we needed, and we still do need, like a strong voice in media, opening different issues in a bit different way. And I actually got the chance to work with people that are doing satire in Macedonia for over 25 years. And you can see how this was a big deal for me, because ever since I was, I don't know, 2 or 3 years old, I was following their shows, and I got to work with these people. And I really believe that if a change can be made here, it probably will be by people who know how to make you laugh and think at the same time. And I do believe that like 1 minute of any satirical content, or just a sketch that has satire in it, or anything that is short and funny and interesting, can make a much bigger change than a news piece and something that is not that fun and kind of boring. So I did it because I believed in it, and I still do 5 years later.
Great, thank you.
So that is why. I'm sorry, but okay, I'm here. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, technical issues. We're used to them.
Thank you, Giovanna.
Thank you.
And Nkechi, what about you? Can you explain a little bit about why you entered the satire field?
Sure. In some ways, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I don't know if it still is, but yes, I've always been attracted to storytelling, especially the kind of storytelling that has the potential to change people's minds about stuff. And at the time, I was working as a film and TV writer, so I was doing more fictionalized stuff when the other news came around. But I felt like this was a chance to get people involved. This was a chance to get people interested, not just in politics, but to just get them interested in, there's a very high rate of apathy in Nigeria. And I felt like this was probably the only way to get people to sit up and pay attention to important issues that were affecting pretty much everybody's lives. So I already kind of had an idea to sort of do my own thing, but the other news came around just before I could. So it was a platform that already existed on a station that was already respected. So it was sort of kismet, I guess, and never regretted it for a day.
Great, thank you, Nkechi. Dylan, while you may not be a satirist, you still are involved in the production of satire. So I'd like to hear from you about why you started getting into the field.
Well, I'm not a traditional satirist like some of the other panelists that we just heard from, for sure. So thank you for allowing me to say a little bit about this. But I kind of came at satire from a media development background. So I had been working in media development for a while, and I saw the limitations of what media development could do in a traditional news programming or journalist training. And so we were always at the time thinking about different ways to reach different audiences and to get messages across to audiences that weren't consuming the investigative reporting that we were otherwise supporting, and how do we reach younger audiences. And so I thought back on my experiences when I was younger and the kind of news that I was consuming and what was influential to me, and I always felt like The Daily Show with Jon Stewart was really just so influential. So through a random series of events, I got to have the great opportunity to work with Kevin Blyer, who's the co-writer of the report and the co-founder of Pilot Media Initiatives, and he was a writer at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart for a number of years. And we got to see that this was a format that could exist outside the United States and succeed very well. I think so. Overall, I was interested in satire because I saw its potential to reach new audiences and to serve as a kind of alternative form of the fourth estate. It's working toward the same goal as traditional media and journalism, just through a little bit of a different funny bone, I guess. So that's how I got involved.
Great, thanks very much, Dylan. Tanya, from your perspective, even though you're not sort of a satire producer, I'd be interested to know what you think about the value of satire and the craft of satire.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, and hello to everybody. As you mentioned, I'm the only non-practitioner in this, and I think from the donor perspective, maybe I can shed some light on why we thought it's important to argue for the support of political satire in the region, and I cover Southeast Europe region. First off, for us, media using satire is a watchdog, just like other media. They're just using different arts and crafts, and they have a couple of unique features. One of them is, I think Nkechi already touched upon the fact that not only do they feature political elites and their shortcomings or deficits, but they're also calling upon the people who are dormant. So that's the only media genre that actually can do that. Another thing that I thought would be important to highlight is that NED is a demand-driven donor. And one thing that we really cannot ignore is the immense demand for political satire in the region in particular. So they draw their legitimacy from the people. Those are the most popular shows. Those are the most popular people in the country. And humor and satire does bring people together. In the region where political elites are really doing their best to divide people along the ethnic or religious lines, humor actually brings people together. It kind of communicates to them that the issues of local governance, for example, is common to all. It doesn't matter what your background is. So there are a couple of other arguments that I thought would be important to highlight, but maybe another important thing is that political satire fosters a culture of participation, and that's something that we are closely looking into when we are trying to argue for support with our decision makers.
Thank you very much, Tanya. That's a really great perspective. Thanks for bringing that. This question is for all of the panelists. How would you describe the craft of satire and what it is trying to do? So in my opening remarks, I said that it promotes democratic rights and freedoms. How does it do that? What strategies and tactics does satire use? to promote democratic rights and freedoms? This is for all panelists, so anybody please jump in.
All right, I'll be the first guinea pig to try and take a stab at this, and of course I'll try to be short to leave room for everyone else. I think an important way to think about answering this question, and you know, of course the other practitioners can talk in more detail about how they created the content that they're working with, but you know, it's I think important to ask what comes first in some of the satirical comedy programming. Is it going to be to entertain the audiences, or is it to inform the audiences? And are those two mutually exclusive? You know, I've always believed that they're not necessarily, that when they work together, that's what truly forms compelling media. And so that should be what satirical comedy is always aspiring to. You know, I think that's a part of the way of figuring out what you're going to talk about in your show and your segments and your jokes. But, you know, another important aspect is asking yourself, well, what issue is nagging at you, and you know, what news item in that day is just not sitting well with you, what doesn't add up, what narrative doesn't make sense to you, and so you need to be ravenous news and media consumers. And so that's a kind of you know, approach that we try to emphasize in the teams that we work with. And you know, I would also say that you want to be asking, how do you elevate the conversation about this topic? You're not just taking low-hanging fruit and you know, saying a funny joke about something that happened in the news, because that's something you can find online in a lot of social media. So how do you say something new and add to the conversation and kind of advance the thinking? And so you know, those are some of the important ways I think that satire can think about this balancing act of talking about news and serious issues at the same time. So there's my point.
Hey, Dylan. What about the other panelists?
Can I? Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nkechi.
All right, cool. So in addition to what Dylan just said, we often at the other news, we sort of try to figure out what exactly what is in the news that is affecting the common man, and how. Like, how would the average person on the street react to whatever piece of legislation or executive declaration was making the rounds that week. We sort of try to figure out what exactly is it, how is it affecting people, and what are the parts of it that are not currently being explored. So beyond just what is on the face of the news, what is behind the news, and how does it impact lives? We also try to make sure we're always punching up, because it's not funny when you're punching down. It's not very comedic. It just seems like you're making a mockery of the situation. So it's a fine line between finding the humor and exploring that humor and using the humor to highlight issues that are affecting people and just making a complete travesty of the entire situation. And we always try to sort of strike that line. Another way we try to do that is to sort of keep ourselves open for criticism. So we're not just making people laugh, we're giving people a chance to weigh in via social media pages usually, like, what do you feel about this? This is what we think. We're not forcing our opinions down on you. We try to present the information in a funny way, yes, but just present it and leave the decisions of what you feel, what your opinions are, where you stand on the issue to the viewer. And I think that really helped.
Great, thank you, Nkechi. Giovanna?
I completely agree with Nkechi. So she kind of covered part of the things that I wanted to say. But another thing that I think is very important nowadays, our societies are extremely polarized. And I don't know about Nigeria, but I believe that here and in Serbia, that is for sure the case. And usually people that don't share your opinion or don't want to talk about a certain issue or just don't want to follow what's going on, whether it is a political or sociological change, they just won't watch traditional news, or they will, I don't know, not read or follow activists that they do not agree with, etc. And I think that this is very important for democracy, to bring people together and for them to talk about the issues, even if they don't share the same opinion. And we're always trying to balance in a way and to give different perspectives on the news, but also because it's fun and because it's funny, sometimes people that won't naturally watch the news, or that don't care about gender equality, or that don't care about certain issues, will watch our show, and we will open these dilemmas for them as well, and they will become involved, which I think it's actually the basis of democracy, because if people don't care, then who oversees the decision makers? So I think that people that wouldn't watch maybe news or something that they don't agree with, watch it because we're trying to make it fun, and some of us are succeeding. Most, I guess.
Thank you, Ivana. Victor, did you have anything to add about the craft and what it achieves and how it does it?
Yeah, I will try to add something because the previous speakers covered most of it. But like Nikechi said, it's a really fine line, and this I think is the key, to find some sort of like balance between what you are trying to say really, and to at the same time make it really funny. We approach it by just trying to make it funny, and then if the viewers or the readers get the point of what we were trying to say, to read between the lines and to read the background of the entire thing, that's a bonus for us. So we never think about it as a let's say informative in an informative way, a tool, but more like an entertainment tool. And then if the information gets through, that's just a bonus for us. I have to admit that we make a lot of jokes that are not informative at all. So that's why I think if we think about informing people too much, sometimes we miss the point, and plus we are not funny. So that's why we are always focusing on the funny first, and then if it also brings some message together with it, that's a bonus.
Thanks, Victor, for that perspective. Actually, Dylan, in the report that he authored for CIMA, did mention that satirists are comedians first. And so I think that's very true, that it's different than a journalist. They're comedians first. And it's very important to be able to leverage the art of comedy in this work.
It's completely different than a journalist. We are still sometimes referred to as journalists when we are guests somewhere on, or when we are giving interviews, and we still find it kind of funny that people refer to us as journalists, even though we have an openly fake news website. But I guess that's the, let's say, easiest way to introduce us. So that's why we don't complain much.
Great. So I would like to dive into sort of the second theme of the event, which is about the strengths and weaknesses of satire. So some of these topics have been raised already, but I would like to dig into them in more depth. But before that, we'd like to show another short video, this one from yesterday's news. Jovana, could you explain briefly about yesterday's news and what we will be seeing?
Yes, sure. So yesterday's news is a newscast-like comedy show, probably similar to the Nigerian show. We try to, yes, comment the news from the previous week, but we also have these comedy pieces of the news. So they actually really look like the news, and that's what you're about to see. It's our journalists being in front of the government, talking to a not so high government official on a certain issue. And I think you will like it, and I hope that you will understand the humor behind it, and I can explain more afterwards. We often use something that looks like the news, but it's actually not. And then we also very often use other types of symbolism to sort of make our point. And of course, like Victor said, first of all, make people laugh. So yeah, you can play it, and I hope that the audience will like it.
Thank you, Ivana. I think it's a great illustration of those points. And do you want to cue the video up?
А сега малку да ги оставиме референдумот и евроатлантските интеграции настрана и да поразговараме за секојдневните проблеми што ги мачаат нашите граѓани. Ланчо е на терен со висок избор од владата. Ланчо?
Да, така е, студио се слушаме, разговараме со еден не толку висок владин извор. Добар ден.
Добар ден.
Колку сте висок?
Па моментално сум висок 1,60 м, но по приемот на земја во НАТО и во ЕУ, очекувам раст од најмалку 20 сантиметри.
Да, ете 1,60 м, но со Добро. Може да започнеме малку со конкретните прашања. Ме интересира што мислите за вакцините кои што треба да ги примаат нашите деца. Има доста бурни реакции дека се ѓубре.
Дајте малку да збориме за приемот на Македонија во ЕУ и во НАТО и какви вакцини ќе имаме тогаш.
Зошто не се реши проблемот со грејењето во школите? Нели сега доаѓа зима, ќе стане ладно, па после децата ќе имаат проблеми.
Има, да, значи
може да настина.
Со приемот на Македонија во ЕУ и во НАТО влегуваме на пазар кој што има 250 пати повеќе шума од Македонија. Значи, да ја замислим една Норвешка, се не знам дали сте чуле тој термин, Норвешка шума. Сите знаеме што е Норвешка, сите знаеме што се Алпите. Само замислиме колку шума ќе може да се извезе во Македонија.
Значи, ве молам, немојте да значи ќе направиме посебна емисија кога ќе влеземе во ЕУ и НАТО. Она што сега ме интересира, дали ќе се случи истото сега на есен со смогот, како што се случи со комарците? Зошто не се решаваат проблемите одма? Што е следно? Што да очекуваме, смог? Значи, да не покоси?
По приемот на Македонија во ЕУ и во НАТО, македонските граѓани ќе имаат можност да купат далеку поквалитетни маски за смог.
Добро, ете студио, како што слушнавме, јас повеќе не би му поставил ни едно прашање, пошто мислам дека ако му беве и да му поставам кога последен пат ќе ги исправил гаките, ќе ми рече дека чека да дојде НАТО и ЕУ за да доста ќути. Што те прашав, одговори.
Абе како така?
Дека следно чека да дојде НАТО и ЕУ за да си ги изберега. Јас стварно не знам кој е последно прашање.
Што е со тие негативни коментари и така има, значи поевтини гаки има у Европа него тука са, што прерамуваме.
Hi.
Thanks very much, Giovanna.
Yeah, I guess you got the idea. The government was pivoting everything to EU and NATO accession while not addressing the other issues. So that was like our funny way of seeing that. I guess everybody else understood because it's in Macedonian and only with subtitles.
I think it's a great segue into sort of my next set of questions. One of the things satire does is impersonate public officials, for instance, as we see in this video, or present fake news as though it's real news. It's that kind of ironic component of it. Do you guys have any examples of times when that's kind of gotten you into trouble, whether you faced political backlash or criticism from the audience because a joke didn't land as well as you had intended?
Who wants to speak first? Should I or?
Yeah, please go ahead, Giovanna.
Yes, but it was never really hard criticism or something. It's just sometimes people disagree with us and we actually like that discussion and encourage it actually, because that's why we're on social media, so that we can communicate to our audience. And we think that that's a plus, like raising some issues and people are commenting on it. I think that's where the change starts. Of course, not everybody agrees with every piece of the news, but we believe that that's a plus. So that's it from me.
What about others? Have you faced any sort of criticism or political backlash for your comedy?
Well, I think we have faced a bunch of people who are critical of what we do, but we've never really had like political backlash. We kind of expected it going in. The fact that it didn't happen is still something that makes us sad. We were looking forward to getting sued. It did not happen. But yeah, we've been accused of being agents of one party or the other, usually in the same episode, which makes it very ironic, in my opinion. Nigeria has primarily two major political parties, and both parties watched one episode and believed we were targeting them, which made for a very fun conversation on Twitter, because both parties were attacking us for pretty much saying the same thing about the other party. It was so we've had incidences like that. We haven't had cases where we've gotten like a government telling us to shut down or something, which would have been fun, but it hasn't happened yet, fingers crossed. We've also not had incidences of getting kidnapped, although we have been told that we shouldn't come to certain states after we aired certain episodes, but again, nothing has happened yet. We're still looking forward to all of that happening. But for right now, no. It's surprisingly, that's what I'm trying to say, is it's easier, I guess, maybe just a little bit easier to present the kind of criticism we do from a comedic point of view. I imagine that if a straight traditional news had done half the things we have done, they might have gotten a little bit more in trouble than we have. But just because people in power at least can write us off as just a comedy show, regardless of how many people watch it and how many people talk about it, we've sort of had more leeway, I guess, than traditional journalists, although the idea of us being journalists is still, like Victor said, ridiculous. But we've gotten away with so much more.
Thanks, Nkechi. Victor, Newsnet's, as you said, is sort of like the Onion, and a lot of times people mistake the Onion for being real news. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, of course, it happens. It happens less and less, which is great actually, because when we started, we thought that every article we publish is going to be misunderstood as real news, which sort of is funny and sort of is like, yeah, look at all these people believing that what we are writing is true, even though we are really trying to emphasize, really trying to make every article as crazy as possible, so it's not mistaken for real news. But sometimes it happens that reality is pretty close to what we wrote, so that's why it happened a lot of times. But I have to say, we didn't get much political backlash when it comes to the website, when it comes to news.net, because I guess the politicians are not that interested in internet and still. But when it comes to TV show, that's a whole different animal. That we are living through a political backlash as we speak right now. So this is the latest one happened when we had sort of like an let's say a short presentation of a biography of one of our ministers, who is now actually having a tour on each national frequency, mentioning us in a negative way, that we are paid by the, I don't know, some other political his political opponents and stuff like that. So we are in a middle of a backlash right now, which is sort of like, it's not let's say, it's not that bad actually. We like it when it happens, because it means that they are paying attention to what we say. But at the same time, it's ridiculous because first of all, we are here to entertain, and it always means that they are running out of opponents when they come to us. So that's why we are a little bit like confused every time it happens.
One thing I wanted to add about the potential political backlash with a lot of these satirical comedy projects. I think I saw this in Nigeria and in Kyrgyzstan when I worked on a project there way back when. Is like Victor was saying, if you're leading with entertainment, it's the show's regarded as entertainment, and so it's kind of given a little bit more wiggle room, also like Nkechi said before. But if the show is produced in good taste, where you're kind of skewering political powers across the spectrum, and you're skewing the ruling party and the opposition party, and you're skewering not only politics, but you're also skewering media powers, I think people have a little bit more, audiences have a little bit more tolerance for it. And so if it's done in good taste and you're skewing across the political spectrum, we actually saw in Kyrgyzstan, Nigeria, that politicians wanted to be guests on the shows that we're working on there. Initially we were afraid that politicians would not want to be on the show, but they wanted to be. And I mean, Nkechi, correct me if I'm wrong, I think some politicians even offered to pay to be on the show. So they really saw, an incentive. Perhaps it was cynical, like they wanted to raise their visibility to a younger audience. But still, like if a show is done in good taste, there's, certainly, that's one thing that can be done to reduce the potential for political backlash.
Yeah, you're not wrong. We did have several offers. It was fun turning them down.
Tanya, what about from your perspective? Can you think of ways from the donor perspective that satire might be a risky investment due to the potential for political backlash?
Sure. I can imagine a ton of scenarios where donors would be reluctant actually to go in and support political satire because it's unpredictable and because political satire has to enjoy a full editorial independence. That's something that a lot of our colleagues are not a big fan of. I would imagine that, for example, in the region that we cover and that Victor and Jovana live, a lot of big donors are actually foreign embassies, and because of their bilateral relationships with the host country, they would probably be reluctant to go ahead and support something that might actually come around and jeopardize their relationship with the host country. So I can see that as a potential. I do remember actually my colleague Kaltrina Selimi, who works with me on the Western Balkans, had mentioned that sometimes the political backlash can actually result in some serious threats to satirists. In Kosovo, for example, there was a group, I forgot the name, but it was a group of comedists who tried to lightly touch upon or to insinuate that the Kosovo Liberation Army might have had committed some war crimes, and that in turn created a really hostile environment for them. However, after a while, actually, internal debate around these issues had been made possible. So there is a danger of comedians getting into serious trouble over this, especially in, as Jovana was mentioning, polarized societies or societies that are not full democracies that are transitioning towards acceptance of the full freedom of speech. However, this is something that the writers have to decide and to kind of be mindful of the issues of their context. So I think from the donor perspective, not many donors are really willing to support something that they cannot fully control. And here I'm not even talking about grasping the impact, because that's another issue with all media projects, which is something that political satire falls under. You cannot really capture a full impact of the media support, let alone political satire. But here the issue is having the ability to chime in with something. That's something that donors do not like. Fortunately, NED does not intervene in editorial policy. We are mindful of the local context, and we monitor our grantees closely, but we do not intervene. So I think that's one of the advantages of not having to worry about getting somebody very upset. As long as it's a non-partisan activity, there's no reason for us to back away.
Great, thank you, Tanya. Another criticism that satire has faced sort of globally is related to kind of the predominance of men in satire and sort of the absence of women in a lot of contexts. We do have some women satirists on this show, which is great. But satire has been criticized for potentially promoting sexism and exacerbating gender inequality. I'm just wondering if anybody has encountered this in your work, and what do you think needs to be done? This is for everyone to answer.
I guess I can go first. You're not entirely wrong. I feel like satire is reflective of the world that we live in, which unfortunately is deeply sexist and very misogynistic. So in a way, I can see how satire can be interpreted to promote the existing inequalities. But I feel like it's maybe a little better in spaces where satire can occur, simply because it's a more progressive form of entertainment than most. So people who are generally attracted to this particular brand of comedy tend to have more open views than what you would find in traditional spaces. But there's still a lot of work to be done. There's clearly a lot of work to be done, especially because most comedy spaces are populated by men, most of whom have worrisome opinions, especially those who are more established in their careers. I feel like just getting more women into the room, giving them a voice, having women represented in the writer's room, as well as in front of the cameras. I feel like that we found that sort of it didn't generally solve the problem. We haven't solved sexism yet. We're still working on that. But it put us in a position where we could generally address issues in a more balanced tone. We could address issues not just from the perspective of the man, but also from like women and how it affected us as 51% of Nigeria is female, but you wouldn't know that to look at any of our ruling houses. You wouldn't know that to look at the legislature or the executive. I think we still have, 6 women out of 306 in the National Assembly. So just getting more women in the room gives us an opportunity to start to address these issues. And I feel like most satire shows, generally because they're more progressive than traditional media, does some of that. Not as well as it should be doing it, but it makes an attempt to start addressing the issues.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I think it's a fair critique. As you said, Heather, it seems to be a problem that you see just about all over the world, with comedy circles being dominated by men. And when in the U.S. we look at late night TV shows, the hosts are predominantly men rather than women. And I've certainly encountered gender inequality in the workplace, and I regret not doing more to push back against some of that culture and some of that behavior. And I've certainly learned from my mistakes. And I do think it's adamant that, of course, women are listened to and that all voices are listened to. And I agree wholeheartedly with Nkechi that one of the first steps that we can take to address this is to ensure that there's gender balance in front of and behind the camera. And it's a complex issue, but that's one thing we can do. I mean, even when we were drafting this report, Heather was at one point taking screenshots of some of the examples of shows, and there are so many examples of men who are hosts sitting behind the desk, and there's a over-the-shoulder graphic, and you just saw it again and again and again, and you're like, okay, there's room for improvement here. So yeah, there's something that can be done.
Can I just add something very briefly? I completely agree with both, and especially with Nkechi, about putting women in the room. And it's not just because it sounds nice and it's the right thing to do, but also because in our case it increased the viewership of women. When we had more women in the script writing team, we somehow naturally touched upon issues that are more interesting to women, and so our viewership balance, before it was more men and less women, like not too much, for example 60-40 or something like that, but the viewership is 50-50, and now we have that just by adding that female voice. We always had a woman and a man in front of the camera, but just also adding women in the writing process and the production process helped us increase our viewership in women. It's a practical thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. So both, I think, are important in this part. And of course, satire is a man's world, just like the world in general, but we will be changing it.
Thank you, Ivana. We're going to move to the question and answer period now. I have a few questions myself, but I'll give some time for the audience. Just a reminder, please type your questions into the Q&A chat box, and then we will read the questions out to the panelists. So I'd like to hand it over to Kate Musgrave, as CIMA's Research and Outreach Officer, to send any of the questions that we have received so far.
Of course, thank you, Heather. So we have one just came in from Herman Wasserman, which I really appreciate because it's one that I had too, and I imagine a number of folks had it on their mind. So I think everyone can see his full comment, but essentially, satire has proven to be a really effective tool to, hold both politicians and the media itself to account. And as this come up a little bit from Victor and Nkechi and others, it's also, very clearly fake news. But sometimes those lines can be blurred a little bit, as Victor has pointed out. People don't always realize that. And Herman is wondering in what way this can undermine journalistic legitimacy and feeding into disinformation. We're very much in a world of fake news, and that's been a real problem, that accusation. So Herman points to one case in particular. So my lights are going out here. In South Africa, a satirist made a joke about a COVID tracking app, and that was misunderstood and misread, of course, and it added to misinformation and a lot of contrarianism, as he said. So in what ways can you try to avoid that? And and beware of some of those unintended dangers of bad satire without, raising your hand and saying, this is just a joke, because of course, it's not always as funny when you have to say this is a joke. So how do you walk that line and try to avoid creating problems like that?
Can I answer? Okay. For us, it's the visuals, and it's also the known faces. People know that we are doing yesterday's news. That's one thing. And yes, of course, we look like news. It might be taken in another way, although we haven't had that issue yet. But I think what's important here is that we also communicate subjects about media literacy in a more fun way, about how to watch the news, about questioning what you see in the news. Critical thinking is very much encouraged through these types of shows. And I think that is important. And we also had a segment when we sort of give a shout out to journalists who are to professional journalists. So I think that, we can work together against this issue. And of course, yes, some people might think at a certain point that it's not real news, but also it's important to know that there's satirical news out there and that this is what they do. So for us, the easiest way to sort of be different than the real news is the fact that we are purple, we look different, and people know our faces, so they know that we're joking. I don't know about the rest.
Yeah, I can add to that. So the host of the main host of the other news is a person who's been a comedian for, I feel like, almost as long as I've been alive in Nigeria. So his face is very much related to comedy in the country. So even despite that, you would be surprised how many people still take what we say as actual fact and news. So what we try to do is we try to hold ourselves to the same standards as journalists in terms of the actual information behind what is in the news. Thursdays, which is the days the show airs, was one of my least favorite days because for several hours on Thursday morning, I would sit down with, so the show airs on a station that is traditionally affiliated with, it's one of the most popular traditional news outlets in Nigeria. So I would sit down with a team of lawyers and fact checkers to make sure that everything we were reviewing on the funny part stayed, but the information had to be actually factual. So I feel like leaving ourselves as satirists open to that heavy fact checking and being open to criticism. We're not infallible. We sometimes say things that may or may not be accurate, but we always leave the option of going back to correct that. And we try our best to make sure that whatever we're putting out there, even though it's satirical, even though it's obviously a play on what's actually happening in the country, we try to make as sure as possible that we're not putting more gasoline in an already flammable situation. We're trying to make things better, not worse. We're not trying to start a war. Like, we're trying to inform people and keep them entertained, but we're also leaving ourselves open to that review process to make sure that we stay as much as possible on the right side of the line.
Yeah, I mean, just one or maybe a few points to make about that. I think that comment kind of boils down to confusion. Is this media product that you're consuming, is it satire or is it fake news? What is it? And I think there's a lot of ways, if you're really dedicated to a satirical comedy project, to brand it in the way, like Ivana was saying, to make sure that it's clear that this is part of a satirical program with a satirical source of news or information. So there's a lot of ways to clearly emphasize that you're doing your due diligence to let audiences know this is how this media product should be consumed. And as Nkechi was also saying, just in terms of fact checking, that's another great step to think about. But there's overwhelmingly there's been a lot of analysis of the satirical comedy projects that were featured in the report that showed that audiences who watched it they were learning not only about the news, they were learning information, but they were actually, the shows acted as a gateway for them to go to other sources of news to learn more information. So it's diversifying their media diets. They're going to other sources. I think overall, if the show is produced or the program is produced in a consistent, reputable way, it does more to enhance media literacy and get people to think critically about the news rather than be confused as fake news. And again, comedy and satire, it's a different way of just fact-checking information. There's a lot of fun ways that it can be done. This wasn't included in the report. I couldn't really see the right place for it, but there's a digital ministry in Taiwan that is using satire and humor and comedians to combat disinformation that is happening around COVID-19. And so, there's a lot of creative ways outside of TV shows that satirical comedy can be used to combat disinformation and not be confused with it necessarily.
Great, thank you. So we've had a number of new questions. So I'll lump them into the cynics in the audience with some more questions along those lines, and a little bit more about the craft of satire, so we can ideally end the panel on a positive note there. So coming from our cynics, we live in a world that's seeing declines in trust in institutions and a lot of cynicism and polarization, as you said. So is there a risk that satire might increase that cynicism, especially as you help people kind of question authority and question the media around them, and how you can respond to that? And kind of along those same lines, and Nikeshi, you started getting into this, a possible answer to this question already. What about when your audience is culturally diverse? What precautions do you have to observe in the use of satire? And what can be successful in that? And what have you seen fail or not be quite as successful? And this question is for anyone on the panel.
Okay, I guess I'll go again since you mentioned my name. In terms of cynicism, I think what we're doing actually has the opposite effect. I feel like we're getting people more interested. Speaking specifically about Nigeria, we have a very proud history of young people not being interested in politics at all. In fact, it's considered a badge of honor when I was growing up to be so disinterested that you have no idea what is going on. And I feel like, if anything, satire and less traditional forms of information and entertainment and all of what we're doing gets more people interested. It tells you why you should be interested. We're not trying to force you to, like I said, have an opinion or decide what your opinion is, but we're trying to get you involved enough that you make up your mind of your own volition. So I feel like if anything else, and studies have shown that, for example, the Daily Show with Jon Stewart at a point was the way people accessed information about politics more than traditional news. So if anything, I feel like satire combats cynicism. It gets people involved, it gets people interested, it fights apathy. And that's just one of the reasons why I'm glad I did what working in the field. The second question about multicultural, Nigeria is a very multicultural society. We have somewhere around 200 languages, I think. I'd have to check that, but yeah. So I feel like if it's done in good taste, if you try your best to balance reports, not to pick a side, not to force people to choose a side in whatever conflict you're covering, if it's done in good taste, if it's balanced, if it's punching up, and if it's funny, then I feel like regardless of whether it's a multicultural society or whether it's one dominant culture and a bunch of, supposed minorities, the way you have in the US, it goes well, it goes over well, because people can tell that it's coming from a place of balance, it's coming from a place of truth, it's coming from a place of reflecting the society as a whole. In addition to that, what we tried to do on the other news was to balance the voices, not just in front of the camera, but behind the camera as well. So we tried as much as possible to get representatives. It wasn't always possible, but we tried our best to get representatives from as many of the cultural groups, whether it was ethnic, whether it was religious, whether it was social or geographical. We tried to get representatives from as many as the groups as we could to ensure that whatever we're doing was balanced. And it helped, it showed in our coverage.
Maybe I can quickly chime in on what Ketchy was saying, is that as a donor, we're very interested in expanding the pool of usual suspects. And what we've seen is that political satire does precisely that. They are communicating political issues to the broader audiences, and those that are usually would not be predisposed to political ideas or issues, and those that would not necessarily have the skills of critical thinking. One of the grantees on the ground had just told me recently that if, for example, they would organize a panel discussion titled "The Democracy in the Region," people who would show up to this discussion would mostly be people who are studying social science or are usually already somehow engaged political activism in some ways. But if they were to bring Victor from News or some of his colleagues, they would probably tackle the same issues, but in using a different channel, different avenue, and different communication tools. So they definitely, I'm on Ketchy's corner. We have witnessed the communicative power of political satire and mobilizing the non-usual suspects of the region. And the second thing on multiculturalism, I think writers are best placed to answer that. But I think as a donor, we're interested to see where they are crossing those fine lines, as it is the case with the sexism, for example. And this is why we vet our partners very carefully. We make sure that whatever they produce is kind of in good taste, as Dylan was mentioning. So we keep an eye out on it, but we usually pick partners that are already mindful of these issues. They know what societies they work in, and they're usually already very careful on those issues.
Great, thank you. So this next grouping, as we talked about, the craft of satire, we can hear from all of you, including Victor and Jovana, since I know it's been a little while. So one person shared a link here, which I hope is available to everyone. Of course, we can share it after the event as well, if not. And it says, I heard you say there is no school for satire. What is the secret in creating punchlines for non-professionals? And kind of in keeping with that, as you talk about the craft of satire, are there traditional forms of humor in your country that are relevant to what you're doing? And is there a way that you can tap into that consciously or otherwise to make it really, honed into the context and where you're working?
Can I, or yeah. First of all, I haven't joined because before everything was covered on the criticism part. I think we can do better in bringing people together so that they laugh together at maybe sometimes even the problems of the society, and then we can find a solution, because we're a bit different than the news and we are more funny than what they're used to hearing. So I think that we're actually doing better than the other types of programs. But that's not a surprise coming from somebody working in satire. So, and about the craft of satire, just, working with the right people and, seeing the funny in everything. There's just one problem that we have, and it's a very big problem, and I'm sure that the Serbian show has it as well, and I'm not sure about the Nigerian, but I'm guessing it's the same. It's that we have really huge, strong competition, and it's the real news, because sometimes they're so ridiculous that you don't know how to be more funny than that or how to top that. We're doing, I guess, better, but politicians can sometimes be very crafty in being more funny than us. And so sometimes we have this issue with satire, not about being funny, but how to be funnier than what's going on around you, and how to be more ridiculous, let's say, than what's going on around us. But in making the news, I don't know, just working with funny people helps. Working with people that has already done this really helps, at least for me. I mean, Nikachi said the same, and I will say the same. Some of the people working on the show have been in comedy for as long as I'm alive, and just learning from the best helps. I don't know how, but it helps.
Well, about this question for creating punchlines for non-professionals, I don't consider myself a professional yet. This is still a thing that I did even before I started making money out of this, started living out of this. I don't think there is a certain definition to creating a joke. Maybe it helps when you do it a lot, let's say, but I think just the goodwill to create a joke helps in the beginning. And there is this, I think, the only sort of like helpful instruction how to make a joke, that the joke has to be surprise in the end, but that doesn't help much. Otherwise, everybody would be making really good jokes all the time. And also there's this quote about analyzing humor, that it's impossible to do it. It's like dissecting a frog. You learn a little bit, but the frog dies in the end. So that's why I think it's really ungrateful and I don't know, impossible to do it in a way, and impossible also to teach somebody how to create a joke. But I guess hanging out with funny people helps. So I was lucky to really have been part of this group for the last 10 years that really probably also made me a better joke writer as I did for them. So let's say that you have to find a really good team.
Perfect, thank you. That's not entirely promising for people who are not naturally funny, but I guess they'll just have to find comedian friends to hang out with. So thank you, Victor. I'm handing it back to Heather, as we're very aware of everyone's time. So thanks for all your questions.
Thanks, Kate. So we're at the end of our time together. I just want to know if any of the panelists has one final word they would like to share. Don't all jump in at once. Dylan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in. And just as a quick way of wrapping up that question, as everybody said, practice makes perfect. You know, satire, comedy, punchline writing, it's like anything else, it's a muscle and you need to exercise in order to build it up. So practice. And just a final note, I would say in terms of satirical comedy programming in international media development, I feel like there's a world of opportunities. One thing that the report, I hope, illustrates is that this has been happening for the better part of 10 years in open, closed, and restricted societies. It takes different forms. You know, it starts either as a website and then goes on to a TV show, or a TV show and then a festival. You know, it can take many different forms, but it has been happening. So rather than you know, asking ourselves whether or not we should be supporting satirical comedy, let's start asking ourselves, how do we support satirical comedy? You know, how can we measure its effectiveness? How can we mitigate the risk and scale up successful projects? I think those are the kind of questions that show that you know, we're treating satirical production outlets just you know, in the same way that we kind of treat independent media outlets in certain countries. They work toward the same goal, they take a different road, and they reach a different audience, but they hit that same end result. So it's very exciting. So that's my final note.
Thanks, Dylan. There were a number of questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. However, CIMA would be happy to connect any members of the audience to any of the panelists at any time. So please reach out to us if you'd like to get in touch with any of our panelists. This event has been recorded and a link will be up on the CIMA website, so please share with your networks and over social media. I would like to thank everyone in the audience for attending. I'd also like to thank Anne Lewandowski and Kate Musgrave from CIMA for their stellar work putting this event together. But finally, I would especially like to thank our panelists for sharing their time and experiences with us and for giving us such an insightful window into the world of satire. So thank you, everyone.